Do me a favor and just look out the window for a second.
Yeah.
If it's raining right now, or I guess even if it's just a gray, cloudy day, what do you actually see?
Well, I mean, I see water, I see gravity doing its thing, maybe some condensation on the glass.
Right. You see physical matter, you're probably predicting the weather, figuring out if you need an umbrella. But if we look at those exact same droplets through the lens of the sources we are deep diving into today, you aren't actually seeing water. You are seeing the aftermath of, of a collapse.
Yeah, a quantum collapse.
Exactly, because before you glance out that window, those droplets were, and I love this quote from one of the lead physicists in our research today, they were smeared probability, just a cloud of maybes.
It sounds so poetic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like something straight out of a sci-fi novel.
Yeah.
But this isn't poetry at all. This is the hard science that literally kept Albert Einstein up at night.
He hated it, right?
Oh, he completely refused to accept it right up until the day he died. He couldn't stand the idea that reality wasn't solid until it was observed.
And that is exactly where we are going today. We're taking a deep dive into the concept of the quantum self. We have this massive stack of notes, articles, research papers here, and they all argue something pretty radical. They argue that the human brain operates on these exact same quantum physics principles.
The core premise is just fascinating to me. It's that your personality, your identity, those traits you think are just fixed in stone, like saying I'm a morning person or I have a bad temper.
Right, things we just assume are hardwired.
Exactly. The argument is that they aren't solid matter. They are quantum possibilities, and you are literally hardening them into reality through the mechanism of your own attention.
So look, if you have ever felt stuck or like you're just playing out a script you didn't write, pay close attention to this. We aren't just talking about subatomic particles today. We're talking about why you are who you are and how you can actually choose an entirely different version of yourself using the laws of physics.
It's a really heavy promise to make.
It is. But let's see if the science actually holds up. To understand this, we have to start with the physics of maybe. We need to go back to 1927, I think, and Werner Heisenberg.
Right, Heisenberg, he's the guy who basically threw a giant wrench into the machine of classical physics. Because before him, we thought the universe was just like a giant clock.
Like if you knew where every gear was, you could predict the future perfectly.
Precisely. But then Heisenberg discovered the uncertainty principle.
Which, if we break it down into layman's terms, means what exactly?
Basically, he found that you cannot know a particle's position and its momentum at the exact same time. The more precisely you try to measure one of those things, the other one it dissolves. It gets fuzzy.
It dissolves into uncertainty.
Exactly. And this kicked open the door to what we call the Copenhagen interpretation, which, by the way, is still the dominant framework in quantum mechanics today. And it makes a claim that is honestly terrifying if you sit with it for too long.
Yeah, it really is.
It says that physical systems do not have definite properties until they are measured.
Okay, let's pause there for a second because that is the concept that usually loses people. So before I look at the particle, it's not just that it's, hiding behind a curtain somewhere. It's that it literally does not have a location.
Correct. It is not hidden. It is in a state of superposition. That's the key technical term we need to understand here. A particle exists as a probability distribution across all possible positions simultaneously.
So it's everywhere and nowhere at once.
Yes. There's actually a wave function equation for this. It's represented by the Greek letter psi, and that symbol represents the superposition of all those possible states. But here is the real kicker, and this is what drove Einstein totally crazy. The act of measurement doesn't reveal where the particle is. It actually creates where the particle is.
See, that is the part that just melts my brain. The act of looking creates the location.
Physicists call this the measurement problem. They've been trying for almost a century now to design an experiment that removes the observer from the equation. They just want to see what reality looks like when literally no one is watching.
But they can't do it.
They cannot do it. Reality and observation appear to be entirely entangled. You cannot separate the watcher from the watched.
Okay, so this is where we need to pivot. Because usually when I hear about quantum mechanics, I think, well, that's cool, but I'm not a subatomic particle. I'm a human being, sitting here eating a sandwich.
Right, the scale problem. It's like I contain multitudes, but I am definitely a solid object.
Exactly. But our sources today argue that this jump from the physics lab to our daily lives isn't just a fun metaphor. It's an actual description of how we function biologically and psychologically.
It is, because you are an observer. That is your fundamental interaction with the world around you. You're constantly taking in data. And the argument being made here is that you have been collapsing the exact same reality over and over again for years.
And this brings us to what the source calls the identity equation. I found this incredibly helpful because it takes all that abstract physics we just talked about and turns it into really simple math. The formula they use is identity equals repeated observation multiplied by time.
It's such a simple formula, but the implications are massive. It suggests that who you fundamentally are is simply what you have been paying attention to, compounded over time.
Let's use the example from the text because I think pretty much everyone can relate to this. The morning person fallacy.
Oh, yeah. So imagine someone who always says, I'm just not a morning person. When we hear that, we tend to think of it as a genetic statement, like having blue eyes or something. But what does that actually mean in quantum terms?
It means they've just had a lot of bad mornings.
Right. It means that on hundreds of separate occasions, this person observed themselves struggling to get out of bed. They observed the grogginess, they observed the irritation, they observed the intense desire to just hit snooze.
And every single time they observed it, they collapsed that specific reality.
Exactly. They collapsed the struggling wave function, and then they acted on it. Maybe they grunted at their spouse, or they skipped their morning workout, which then reinforced the next observation. Eventually, after you do enough repetitions of this, that collapsed reality just hardens. It feels like gravity. It feels like, well, this is just who I am.
It solidifies into a permanent trait.
Yes. But the big reveal here, and honestly, this is the really hopeful part, is that before the observation happened, both versions existed.
That was the huge aha moment for me when reading this.
Right before you looked, the morning person version of you and the night owl version of you were both suspended in superposition. They were both equally real. They were just waiting in that cloud of probability. You just happened to select one of them through a million tiny acts of attention.
So neither version is inherently true.
No, neither is more true than the other. They are both just collapsed wave functions. One of them just has way more historical weight behind it because you've looked at it more often.
This actually connects directly to something deeper and, I think, a bit darker, which is why we keep repeating the same mistakes in life. The source goes into something called repetition compulsion. Can we break that down?
This part is fascinating because it totally bridges the gap between Sigmund Freud and quantum mechanics. So Freud noticed that people tend to recreate the exact same painful dynamics in their lives. They date the same type of toxic partner over and over, or they have the exact same conflicts with every boss they ever work for.
Which feels completely irrational. I mean, if it hurts, why on earth do we keep doing it?
Well, Freud thought this was some deep, unresolved psychological material trying to express itself. He thought the subconscious was basically trying to solve the original trauma by reenacting it. It was a very psychoanalytic view, very focused on the ghosts of your past.
But our source material says it's actually way simpler than that.
Much simpler. And perhaps more disturbing, honestly. It argues that you just keep observing the same reality because that is where your attention is trained to go. It's not a ghost from your childhood, it's just a habit.
A habit of observation.
Think about how memory works. Most of us assume memory is like opening a file cabinet in your brain and pulling out a document. If I ask you about your 10th birthday, you go to the 10th birthday folder, pull out the piece of paper, read it to me, and put it back.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels, like a faithful recording of what happened.
But neuroscience, and the text we're looking at, tells us that is not how it works at all. Memory is actually a present moment act of creation.
Wait, walk me through that. When I remember something, I'm not just retrieving it from storage.
No, you are actively reconstructing it based on your current state of mind. Every time you access a memory, let's say a childhood wound or a really bad breakup, you are standing at the quantum field right now in the present. You are selecting that specific narrative of how you were wronged or how you failed, and you are collapsing it all over again in the present moment.
So by obsessing over the past, or even just venting about it constantly to friends, I'm not just thinking about it, I'm literally recreating it.
You are recollapsing that identity. You are confirming to the universe, yes, this is who I am. I am the person this terrible thing happened to. And by doing that, you essentially ensure that your future is going to look exactly like your past. You are taking the wave function of victim or failure and hardening it again and again.
Man, that is heavy. But it explains so much about why genuine change is so incredibly hard. You think you're just processing the past, doing the work, but you're actually anchoring it in place.
Exactly. And the more you anchor it, the less likely you are to see any other probability in the quantum field. You become totally blind to the version of you that didn't fail, or the version of you that learned from the experience and actually moved on.
But it gets even harder when you bring other people into the mix. There is a whole section here on the entanglement principle that really struck me. Because up until now, we've kind of talked about this like it's a solo game, just me and my brain in an empty room. But we don't live in a vacuum.
No, we live in a massive web of observers. In physics, entanglement is what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance. It's when two particles become so correlated that if you change the state of one, the other changes instantly, no matter how far apart they are in the universe.
And the source applies this directly to our social circles.
We experience social entanglement. We are entangled with every single person we observe and interact with.
I feel like this is the trap most of us fall into. We decide to change. Maybe we read a great self-help book, or we go to a weekend seminar and we feel totally transformed. But then we go back home and everyone around us expects us to stay exactly the same.
Because we're entangled with everyone who observes us. The source creates another equation for this that I love. It says your collapsed self equals the sum of everyone's observations of you.
Whoa. So my identity isn't just based on my own observation, it's your observation of me too.
Weighted by how strongly entangled we are, yes. Think about it practically. Let's say you wake up and decide, I am going to be super confident and assertive today. You pump yourself up in the mirror. But then you walk into a family dinner where everyone has known you as the shy, quiet kid for 20 years. What happens?
I immediately shrink. I go right back to being the shy kid. It feels almost physical when it happens.
It is physical in a quantum sense,
Right.
because their expectations are acting as measurements. They are actively observing the shy version of you. They're looking for it.
Yeah.
And that collective observation pulls you right back into that collapsed state. It's incredibly difficult to hold a brand new wave function when everyone around you is busy collapsing the old one.
It's like peer pressure, but at a fundamental quantum level.
Quantum peer pressure, that's exactly what it is. And the thing is, it's not malicious on their part. They're just accustomed to the pattern. They're comfortable with the you that they already know.
This completely explains why fresh starts work so well for people. Like moving to a totally new city where nobody knows you. I always thought that was just a psychological trick or about running away from your problems. But the physics actually suggests it's a completely valid strategy.
It absolutely is. A new environment equals new observers. If you move to a city where no one knows you were always the shy kid, you are completely free to collapse a totally different version of yourself. You get to be seen by someone new, which in turn helps you see yourself differently. The entanglement is broken, or at least it's hit the reset button. You don't have all that historical weight dragging you back to the old wave function.
So we have this internal mechanism of observation, which is our own habits, and then we have this external pressure from social entanglement. But there is a third player in this game, and honestly, reading this part made me want to throw my smartphone straight into the river.
The attention apocalypse.
Yeah. This is where we really have to look at the stakes of all this. If we accept the premise that attention is the actual mechanism that selects reality, then whoever controls your attention essentially controls your life.
And right now, there is a literal multi-billion-dollar economic war being waged for our attention.
Let's look at the math provided in the notes here. It says the average daily screen time is around 7 hours a day.
Which is honestly conservative for a lot of people.
Right. And if you calculate that out over an average adult life, it comes to roughly 150,000 hours of observation.
150,000 hours. That is a massive, massive amount of collapsing.
And the real question is, observation of what? That's what scares me the most.
Exactly. Are you observing your own potential? Are you observing beauty in the world? Or are you just observing highly curated highlight reels that are designed to make you feel inadequate? Are you observing outrage content that's specifically engineered to make you anxious?
It's the outrage stuff for me. You doom scroll for an hour and you just feel physically heavy afterwards. You feel cynical about everything.
That heaviness you feel is the collapse. If you spend 150,000 hours observing anxiety, fear, and inadequacy, you are actively training your brain to collapse a reality where the world is a terrifying place and you are simply not enough. You are collapsing a reality that was explicitly designed by corporations to keep you clicking on their platforms.
It's like we are outsourcing our reality creation to an algorithm.
We are. And the real tragedy here, as the source points out so well, is the opportunity cost. Because the quantum field still contains all those other versions of you.
A version sitting out there in the superposition.
Yes. Right there in the static, there are versions of you that are wealthy. versions that are deeply connected to others, versions that are genuinely excited to wake up in the morning. They're entirely real,
Mm,
and they're just waiting to be observed.
right.
But they require the currency of your attention.
And we're broke.
We have sold all of our currency to the algorithm. If you have absolutely no attention left over to buy that new reality, you're just stuck with a cheap one that's being spoon-fed to you.
That is such a terrifying perspective. It really shifts the idea of screen time from just being a bad habit to being a literal existential threat.
It absolutely should be viewed that way. Your attention is the single most valuable resource you possess, not just for productivity at work, but because it is the actual architect of your identity.
So let's pivot to the solution. How do we take this currency back? How do we start what the text calls collapsing forward?
We have to really understand the concept of the superposition self. We all tend to think the real me is the introvert or the accountant or the parent, but the real you isn't any of those specific states.
Those are just the collapsed versions we've gotten used to.
Right. The real you is the superposition itself. You are the raw potential to be any of it.
The source mentions peak states here, things like flow states or mystical experiences.
Right. Just think about a time you were truly in flow. Maybe you were playing a sport or working on a passion project or honestly just laughing with your friends until your sides hurt. In those specific moments, the habitual collapse pattern breaks. You entirely stop observing yourself as the person who worries about money or the person with social anxiety. You just are. You temporarily observe yourself as something completely new.
And usually afterwards we say something dismissive like, man, I don't know what got into me. That wasn't really me.
Exactly. We dismiss it as a total anomaly. We think the depressed, anxious version is the real us, and the happy, capable version was just some weird fluke. But the quantum view says no, that was you. That was you successfully observing a totally different possibility. The goal is to figure out how to make that the norm rather than the exception.
So how do we actually flip the model? Because usually my thought process is I need to do something, see the physical result, and then I'll believe I'm that kind of person. Like I need to get the big promotion and then I'll finally feel successful.
That is the standard model. It goes action, then results, then identity. It's slow, it's clunky, and it largely keeps you trapped because you are constantly waiting for external proof to give you permission to change. The quantum model completely flips it around. It goes observation first, then identity, then action, and finally results.
You have to pre-collapse the identity.
Precisely. You have to select the possibility you want from the quantum field before the external evidence shows up to justify it. This actually explains why things like visualization and mental rehearsal work so well.
Which I'll admit I have always been super skeptical of. It always felt a bit too woo-woo for me.
It definitely does, until you look at the underlying mechanics of it. It's not magic at all. It's just training your observation muscle. If you spend 10 minutes every single day vividly imagining yourself as a confident person, really feeling the posture, hearing the tone of voice, picturing the positive reaction of others, you are practicing the collapse of that specific wave function. You are literally making that neural pathway the dominant one.
So it's like you're tuning the radio dial to the right station before the music even starts playing. You have to locate the frequency first.
And once you tune into that frequency, once you collapse that identity internally, the physical actions that align with it just become entirely natural. You don't have to constantly force yourself to act confident. You naturally act confident because you are actively observing yourself as a confident person.
I really love that distinction. External circumstances do not define your identity. Your identity shapes your external circumstances.
That is the core takeaway of all this research.
This has been, honestly, a lot to process. It is a complete inversion of how we are basically taught to operate from childhood.
It shifts all the responsibility back onto you.
It really does. It completely removes the victimhood aspect. You aren't a victim of your past, and you aren't a victim of your so-called fixed personality traits. Those are really just stories you keep telling yourself. You just keep collapsing them.
And you can choose to stop. You can choose to look elsewhere in the field.
So just to recap everything we've covered today, our reality is a cloud of probabilities until we observe it. We build our identity by repeatedly observing the same things about ourselves, which is then reinforced by the people around us and the media we consume every day. But we have the power to choose to look at something else. We can stop giving our valuable attention to the things that make us feel small and start observing the potential that makes us expand.
Very well said. It's ultimately all about the stewardship of your own attention.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought, something to really chew on as you go about the rest of your day.
I'd ask you to really consider the superposition self we talked about. We're all so profoundly addicted to being somebody specific. But if you could manage to stop observing your habitual self, that version of you that you know so incredibly well, with all of its limitations and all of its heavy history, just for one single day, who or what might you actually become? Because the version of you that creates meaningful work or finds deep connection or lives with total freedom, that version isn't somewhere far off in the future. It is right there, right now in the static, just waiting for you to look at it.
Just waiting for you to look at it. That is a perfect place to end. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks so much for listening.